When you awaken, something unexpected happens. You become a mirror people fear. Not because you expose them, but because your presence reveals what they've been hiding from themselves. If this message resonates, remember to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. There is a strange shift that enters your life the moment you begin to wake up. It doesn't come with grand symbols or dramatic signs. It arrives quietly, almost unnoticed, yet it changes the entire way you move through the world. When you stop playing the game of life with the same seriousness as before, when you see through the great cosmic joke that everything is built upon, you become something unexpected in the eyes of others. You become inconvenient. Not because you intend to disturb anyone. In truth, you are simply being for the first time. You breathe without effort. You walk with a certain lightness, a freedom that doesn't demand validation. But that quiet ease unsettles something in those who have not yet tasted it. It rattles their cages, and often they don't even understand why. You may walk into a room calm and open, only to be met with a glare as if you've offended someone's entire family. You haven't said a word. You haven't done anything wrong. Yet your presence alone seems to activate an invisible alarm within their nervous system. Why does this happen? Why does your gentle refusal to participate in the usual social dance make people so uncomfortable? The deeper truth is that awakening turns you into a mirror, and mirrors reveal what people have worked very hard not to see. Not because you're judging them, not because you intend to expose anything, but because you now exist differently. You're no longer playing by the old rules, and the ego in others becomes nervous in the presence of someone who has stepped outside the script. These reactions are not about superiority. If you ever feel them leaning in that direction, that's simply your own ego trying to sneak back in. What we're focusing on here is clarity, understanding, compassion. Because once you see what's truly happening, you can walk your path without being shaken by others' responses. You can meet their reactions with steadiness instead of confusion. One of the first noticeable changes after awakening is that explanations suddenly lose their importance. You stop defending yourself. You stop justifying your choices. You no longer feel the need to provide long, carefully crafted reasons for how you live. You begin to say no without attaching a paragraph to it. And strangely, this irritates people. They want explanations you no longer feel compelled to give. They want your life to pass through their internal approval filter. The ego loves to judge, to measure, to label. So when you step out of that dynamic and refuse to play the game of seeking understanding, the ego feels deprived. It feels as if you violated an unspoken rule. So suddenly you're called distant, rude, or arrogant. People insist you've changed. They accuse you of thinking you're better than they are. But they misunderstand what's actually happening. You aren't becoming superior. You're becoming free. When you were asleep, you spent an enormous amount of energy trying to convince people that you were living correctly. You defended your choices, justified your actions, and tried to earn approval from those who were just as confused as you were. But awakening reveals a simple truth. No explanation can ever satisfy an ego that is hungry for control. So when you stop feeding that hunger, people become irritated. They assume your silence is a refusal to cooperate, that your peace is a sign of withdrawal. But in reality, you simply stepped off the stage. Your energy now moves like water flowing around a rock. The rock can complain that the water is moving too quickly, too quietly, too freely, but the water does not stop flowing. It does not pause to explain why it flows. It simply moves in the direction it is meant to move. Awakening brings that same effortless movement to your life, and while it may disturb others, you do not need to defend your refusal to defend yourself. You continue walking, offering presence rather than explanations. Once people sense that something in you has shifted, that you've found a steadiness they have not yet discovered, a curious reaction begins to surface. They start testing you, often not deliberately, often not consciously. But the testing happens all the same. It begins subtly. They poke at you with small comments. They bring up old conflicts. They mention things they know once bothered you. They revive memories designed to provoke a reaction. A colleague suddenly becomes overly critical. A family member brings up the one topic that always started an argument. A friend makes sly remarks about how you've changed too serious, not serious enough, or simply different. It's almost predictable. The moment you say something no longer affects you, someone tries to test that exact thing, because the ego in them desperately wants proof that your peace is an act. If they can make you react, they can dismiss your awakening. If they can break your calm, they can reassure themselves that nothing truly changes. If you react, the ego wins. It gets to say, "See, you're just like everyone else." But if you don't react, if you remain grounded and calm, their ego becomes even more irritated. Now, it can't dismiss what it sees. Now it must confront the possibility that your peace is real, and that threatens the foundation of the ego's identity. So what do? You let them test. You let them poke and prod without absorbing any of it. Not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you genuinely aren't bothered anymore. You've seen through the illusion. You recognize that their testing is simply fear, fear of change, fear of uncertainty, fear of a truth they're not ready to face. Another reaction arises when you awaken, and this one is quieter but equally revealing. When you step away from drama, when you stop gossiping and stop participating in the familiar patterns of complaint and conflict, something interesting happens. You stop adding to the noise. And because you stop adding to the noise, you become the topic of it. People begin to talk about you. They create stories to explain why you've changed. They speculate. They analyze. They search for reasons that fit their worldview. Some say you think you're better than everyone else. Others insist you've become distant or strange. Some claim you're too spiritual, while others say you're not grounded. A few even whisper that something must have gone wrong in your life. A collapse, a crisis, a phase. All these stories grow in rooms you aren't in, among people who never ask you a single honest question, because the ego must categorize what it doesn't understand. If your transformation doesn't fit into any of its existing boxes, it simply creates new ones, usually unflattering ones. These stories allow others to avoid questioning their own patterns. If they can explain you away, they don't have to reflect on themselves. But here's what matters. You cannot stop the stories. You cannot control the whispers. And if you try, you will exhaust yourself and fall right back into the drama you walked away from. The awakened response is simple. You let them talk. Their stories have nothing to do with you. They are projections of their own fears and resistance to change. What others think of you belongs to their world, not yours. You are not the character in their story. You are the presence walking your own path. And like wind moving through branches, you keep going untouched, unbothered, and undefended. Among all the reactions that arise when you awaken, this one can feel the most personal. It comes from the people who knew you before your transformation, family members, lifelong friends, co-workers who watched you grow into your former identity. These individuals built expectations around who you used to be, and your awakening disrupts the script they've memorized. They remember the old you, the you who reacted the same way they reacted, the you who joined every argument, the you who played the familiar emotional roles that held your relationships together. But now, you've changed. You don't fall into old traps. You don't engage in the same conflicts. You don't perform the role they assign to you. And that makes them uncomfortable. So they try to pull you back, sometimes softly, sometimes aggressively. A parent says, "You used to tell me everything." A friend insists you're not fun anymore. A sibling accuses you of thinking you're too good for the family. Someone hints that you've lost your personality or drifted too far into seriousness. But beneath all of these reactions lies the same truth. If you can change, then they might have to change too. And that terrifies the ego. Change threatens the predictable patterns their identity depends on. Even if those patterns were unhealthy, they were familiar, and familiarity feels safe. But here is the core truth. You cannot go back. Even if you wanted to, the old roles no longer fit. They feel like costumes you once wore in a play you no longer believe is real. You can still love these people. You can still show kindness. You can still share space with them. But you cannot pretend to be someone you're not just to make them comfortable. You remain present. You remain gentle. You refuse to take the bait when they pull on old emotional threads. You don't defend yourself when they accuse you of changing. You don't explain yourself when they project their discomfort onto you. You simply show up as who you are now and trust that they will adjust in their own time, or they will not. Either way, you stay aligned with your path. The greatest act of love is not shrinking yourself to sustain old patterns. It is allowing truth to reshape you, even when others resist. This next reaction is subtle and often misunderstood. It doesn't show up as loud conflict or dramatic accusations. Instead, it appears in the quiet spaces, in the awkward pauses, in the tension that seems to arise out of nowhere when you simply exist as yourself. When you awaken, your presence alone can unsettle certain people. Not because you're doing anything wrong, not because you're judging anyone, not because you're trying to appear wise or special. In fact, awakening usually makes you more gentle, more open, more authentically interested in others than ever before. But something about your stillness makes their inner noise impossible to ignore. Your calmness amplifies their chaos. Your peace exposes their restlessness. Your quietness reflects the mental chatter they've been drowning in for years. Consciousness is contagious, and for the ego, that's unsettling. Sit beside someone in silence, and they may feel pressured to fill the space with unnecessary chatter. Stay present in a conversation, and they may feel suddenly exposed by their own lack of presence. Be comfortable in yourself, and they may feel painfully aware of how uncomfortable they are in themselves. So they project their discomfort outward. They ask why you're so quiet. They ask if something is wrong. They ask if you're upset with them. They assume your stillness is a judgment, when it's simply stillness. And because this discomfort is hard for the ego to process, some people begin to avoid you. They decline invitations. They pull away. They drift out of your life without fully understanding why. But here is the irony, the beautiful twist in all of this. The very thing that makes them uncomfortable is exactly what they need. Your stillness offers a moment of peace. Your presence offers a glimpse of another way to live. Your freedom shows them a possibility beyond the turbulence of the mind. But the ego resists that possibility. It clings to its patterns. It blames you for the discomfort it cannot name. So how do you respond? With compassion, because you remember how it felt to be asleep, the constant mental noise, the anxiety, the pressure to perform, the fear of being seen for who you really were. You do not take their discomfort personally. You do not shrink your light. You do not pretend to be busy or loud or reactive just to help them feel safe. You stay present. You stay open. You stay available, whether they want to talk or simply sit quietly. And in your presence, even if they resist it, you become a quiet reminder that peace exists. As these patterns accumulate, something becomes unmistakably clear. None of the reactions people have toward your awakening are truly about you. Not the glares, not the accusations, not the testing, not the gossip, not the discomfort your presence evokes. Every reaction is about the person experiencing it. When someone looks at you with irritation, they are responding to their own inner tension. When they demand explanations, they are wrestling with their own fear of losing control. When they gossip about you, they are narrating their own insecurities. When they try to pull you back into old patterns, they are trying to preserve the identity they've built. When they feel uneasy around your stillness, they are feeling their own unresolved chaos. You have become, without trying, a mirror, and mirrors reveal what people have worked hard not to see. Some individuals look into that mirror and feel inspired. They sense a possibility in your presence, a calmer life, a freer mind, a deeper peace. They lean in. They ask questions. They feel something awakening inside them. These are the ones who are ready, even if only slightly, to begin their own journey. But others look into the same mirror and feel threatened. They see their own fears. They see their attachment to the game they've been playing. They see the fragility of the identity they've invested so much energy into maintaining. And so they react. They defend. They project. They resist. Not because of who you are, but because of what they see reflected back at them. When you understand this, everything shifts. You stop taking things personally. You stop wasting energy on confusion or self-doubt. You respond with clarity, compassion, and steadiness. Clarity, because you see the reaction for what it is. Compassion, because you remember what it felt like to be asleep. Steadiness, because shrinking yourself does not help anyone awaken. This understanding marks a deeper phase of your awakening. You're no longer shaken by the surface reactions of others. You're no longer tempted to explain or prove anything. You simply witness their experience while remaining anchored in your own. As your clarity deepens, a subtle temptation appears, one that feels compassionate on the surface, but is actually a quiet trap. You may feel the urge to shrink yourself, to soften your presence, to dim your light just enough to keep others from feeling threatened. You may want to laugh at jokes that no longer resonate. You may want to pretend to be bothered by things that no longer affect you. You may want to slip back into familiar roles just to make others comfortable. But dimming your light serves no one. It doesn't make others stronger. It doesn't help them wake up. It doesn't protect the relationship in any meaningful or lasting way. All it does is delay your growth and keep them anchored in the illusions they are afraid to question. Your awakening is not an attack. Your peace is not a provocation. Your freedom is not a judgment against anyone. It is simply a possibility some people may not be ready to face. Even when your presence irritates the ego, even when it creates discomfort, even when it stirs resistance, it is still a gift, because discomfort is often the first crack in the armor, the first ripple in still waters, the first subtle invitation toward a different way of living. Awakening does not ask you to hide. It asks you to stand firmly in truth, even when truth disrupts the room. It asks you to remain authentic, even when authenticity feels unsafe. It asks you to honor the clarity that has taken you so long to discover. So you choose not to shrink. You choose not to pretend. You choose not to step backward into the patterns that once consumed you. You continue becoming who you are meant to be, not to impress anyone, not to prove anything, but because anything less would betray the life that is unfolding within you. This steadiness becomes your silent teaching. It shows, without words, that clarity is possible. As you walk further along this path, something softens inside you. You begin to trust the unfolding not because you understand every part of it, but because you sense a deeper intelligence guiding all things. You stop trying to control how people see you. You stop trying to convince anyone of anything. You no longer push, defend, or persuade. Awakening has its own rhythm, its own timing, its own way of revealing what needs to be seen. No matter how much you wish others could experience the clarity you found, you realize you cannot wake anyone up. Awareness cannot be handed over like a gift or argued into existence. Each person must discover it in their own season, their own struggle, their own moment of readiness. Your role is much simpler. Remain awake yourself. Live with presence. Live with compassion. Live with clarity, but without demanding that anyone follow your lead. From this place, something surprising happens. You develop a sense of humor about the entire process. You start to see the cosmic joke behind it all, the way consciousness pretends to be separate individuals, the way egos clash and defend themselves, the way we forget who we are and then exhaust ourselves trying to become something else. You stop taking reactions personally because you see that they were never personal. You stop taking drama seriously because you see how fragile and fleeting it truly is. You begin to laugh quietly, kindly at the absurdity of the human game. What once felt heavy becomes light. What once felt painful becomes almost poetic. What once felt like conflict becomes another scene in a play we all forgot we were acting in. And you remember, everyone is doing the best they can with the level of awareness they have. You were asleep once too. So you trust the process. You trust that awakening spreads in ripples. You trust that discomfort is part of opening. You trust that life knows exactly what it's doing, even when others resist, misunderstand, or pull away. You let them have their journey. You let yourself have yours. And you walk with a quiet steadiness that needs no recognition and seeks no validation. When the testing quiets down, when the whispers fade, when the reactions lose their intensity, something essential remains at the center of your transformation. Awakening is not measured by what you say, explain, or convince others of. Its power does not come from teaching, preaching, or proving anything. Its power comes from the simplicity of your being. You begin to understand that the most transformative gift you offer the world is presence, not arguments, not philosophies, not explanations. Presence dissolves the frantic pace of the ego. Presence softens the chaos in those around you. Presence irritates the ego because it exposes the game. Presence awakens those who are ready to see. Your role is not to change others. Your role is not to fix them. Your role is not to drag anyone into awareness. Be like water flowing around a rock. Be like wind moving through trees. Be like light entering darkness without effort or resistance. Your presence becomes a silent teaching, a wordless reminder that the emperor has no clothes, that the identity game we all play is just a game. Beneath the roles, beneath the stories, beneath the masks, there is something constant and pure. And the less you care about how others react to it, the more powerful it becomes. When you no longer try to wake anyone up, your presence itself begins to awaken them. When you drop the need to argue with the ego begins to dissolve in the calmness you radiate. When you refuse to shrink, others begin to sense their own expansion is possible. So let them react. Let them misunderstand. Let them gossip. Let them test you. Let them avoid you. Let them cling to their stories until they're ready to let go. Your only task is to stay awake, to stay present, to stay free, because in the end, awakening is not something you talk about. It is something you live, something you embody, something you express without effort. And that simple radiance, the calm, steady presence of someone who is no longer trapped in the illusions of the ego, is one of the most powerful forces in the world.